Marcus Rodriguez lay motionless on the hospital bed, his dark eyes fixed on the ceiling tiles above. The steady beep of monitors filled the silence, a constant reminder that he was alive when he shouldn't be. His right leg was wrapped in thick bandages, metal pins holding together what the explosion had tried to tear apart. The doctors said he was lucky. Marcus didn't feel lucky. The door to his room opened with a soft whistle, and Marcus turned his head slightly. Another nurse. This was the fourth one today, each one more determined than the last to get him to cooperate with his treatment. He had refused physical therapy, barely touched his meals, and hadn't spoken more than 2 words since arriving at Walter Reed Medical Center 3 weeks ago. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm Emily Chen," the young woman said, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. She looked fresh out of nursing school, probably not much older than 25. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her scrubs were still crisp from the morning shift change. "I'll be taking care of you today." Marcus said nothing. He had learned that silence was his best weapon here. If he didn't engage, they would eventually leave him alone. The psychiatrists, the physical therapists, the well-meaning volunteers, they all gave up eventually when faced with his wall of silence. Emily checked his chart, her movements efficient but careful. She had clearly been briefed about his case. Navy SEAL, wounded in Afghanistan, refusing treatment. The hospital was full of cases like his, warriors who had given everything for their country and now struggled to find meaning in the quiet sterility of recovery. "Your vitals look good," she said, making notes on her tablet. "Pain level today?" Marcus continued staring at the ceiling. A water stain shaped like a bird caught his attention. He had been studying it for days, memorizing every edge and shadow. It was better than thinking about the mission, about the faces he would never see again, about the explosion that had stolen everything from him in a single, deafening moment. Emily moved around the room with quiet confidence, adjusting his foredrip and checking the bandages on his leg. She didn't try to force conversation like the others. She didn't tell him how brave he was or how things would get better. She simply did her job, and Marcus found himself watching her reflection in the window beside his bed. "I know you probably don't want to hear this," Emily said finally, not looking up from her work, "but you're going to need surgery again next week. The orthopedic surgeon wants to adjust the pins in your femur. The bone isn't healing as quickly as they hoped." Marcus felt a flash of anger. More surgery meant more time in this place, more time away from his team. Except his team was gone. The thought hit him like a physical blow, just as it did every time his mind wandered to Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Williams, who had 2 kids and coached Little League on weekends. Corpsman Jenkins, who could make anyone laugh even in the worst situations. Lieutenant Morrison, who had saved Marcus's life twice before Afghanistan claimed his own. "The surgeon will want to discuss the procedure with you tomorrow," Emily continued. "But you don't have to decide anything today. Recovery isn't a race, Mr. Rodriguez. It's more like learning to walk a new path." Marcus finally looked at her directly. There was something in her voice, a quality he couldn't identify. Not pity, he had heard enough pity to last a lifetime. Not false cheerfulness either. Something else. Something that reminded him of the way his teammates talked during the quiet moments between missions, when they were just men sharing fears and hopes in the darkness. "Have you worked with many military patients?" Marcus asked, his voice rusty from disuse. Emily's face showed surprise at hearing him speak. "Some," she said carefully. "My brother is Army. He's deployed right now, actually. 3rd tour." Marcus nodded slightly. That explained the quality in her voice, the understanding that came from loving someone who lived in harm's way. "What's his MOS?" "Combat engineer," Emily replied. "He disarms IEDs." The room fell quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence. Marcus had lost teammates to roadside bombs, had seen what those hidden explosives could do to vehicles and the men inside them. Emily's brother walked toward those dangers every day, just as Marcus once had. "The doctors say you were found by a patrol 6 hours after the blast," Emily said gently. "You survived in the desert for 6 hours with a shattered leg and internal bleeding. That takes incredible strength. Marcus closed his eyes. He didn't want to remember those 6 hours, the pain and the thirst, the way the sun had beaten down on him as he lay trapped under debris from the compound wall. He remembered calling out for his team until his voice gave out, remembered the growing certainty that he was going to die alone in a foreign desert, just another casualty in a war that seemed to have no end. "I wasn't strong," he said finally. "I was just too stubborn to die." Emily smiled, and, for the first time since waking up in the hospital, Marcus felt something other than anger or emptiness. "My brother says the same thing. He says stubbornness is a military virtue." Over the next few hours, Emily checked on him regularly. She didn't push for conversation, but, when Marcus asked about her brother, she shared stories. How he had joined the army straight out of high school, determined to serve his country. How he sent pictures from overseas of the villages where he worked, the children who followed his unit around, the schools and clinics that were being rebuilt. "He says the hardest part isn't the danger," Emily said during one visit. "It's coming home and trying to explain to people why it mattered. Why the risks were worth it." Marcus understood that struggle. Even before his injury, he had found it difficult to bridge the gap between his military life and the civilian world. How could he explain the brotherhood of his SEAL team to people who had never depended on others for their lives? How could he describe the satisfaction of completing impossible missions to friends who complained about traffic jams and workplace politics? As evening approached, Emily brought his dinner tray. The food looked as unappetizing as always: overcooked vegetables, mystery meat, and pudding that had the consistency of rubber. Marcus had been forcing himself to eat just enough to keep the medical staff from putting him on a feeding tube. "You know," Emily said, sitting down in the chair beside his bed, "my brother's team has this tradition. They leave care packages for each other when someone gets injured or has to go home early. Little things, favorite snacks, books, letters from family. They call them bridge packages because they're supposed to help bridge the gap between there and here." Marcus looked at her curiously. "Bridge packages?" "The idea is that healing isn't just about the physical stuff. It's about remembering who you are beyond the uniform, beyond the mission. Finding new purpose when the old purpose isn't possible anymore." Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. "This isn't much, but I thought you might like it." She placed it on his bedside table. "You don't have to open it now. Or ever, if you don't want to. But it's there if you need a reminder that someone understands what you're going through." Marcus stared at the package for a long time after Emily left. It was small, wrapped in brown paper with his name written in careful handwriting. No one had given him a gift since arriving at the hospital. The flowers and cards from distant relatives had stopped coming weeks ago, and his parents lived too far away to visit regularly. Finally, as the hospital settled into its nighttime quiet, Marcus reached for the package. Inside was a small wooden coin, roughly the size of a silver dollar. It had been carved with intricate detail. On one side was the Navy SEAL trident, on the other were the words courage, honor, commitment, surrounded by stars. Underneath the coin was a folded piece of paper. Marcus opened it carefully and read Emily's neat handwriting. "Mr. Rodriguez, my brother carved this during his first deployment. He says that sometimes, when everything feels lost, it helps to hold on to something that reminds you of who you are at your core. You are a warrior. That doesn't change because of an injury. It just means you're fighting a different kind of battle now. The courage that got you through your missions is the same courage that will get you through recovery. You just have to give it time." Emily Marcus held the coin in his palm, feeling its weight and the smoothness of the carved wood. For the first time since the explosion, he felt a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him think about tomorrow instead of dwelling on yesterday. He placed the coin on his bedside table where he could see it and settled back against his pillows. Outside his window, the lights of the hospital parking lot twinkled like distant stars. Somewhere in Afghanistan, Emily's brother was probably settling in for another night in a forward operating base, surrounded by fellow soldiers who understood the weight of service and sacrifice. Marcus thought about his own team, about the missions they had completed together, the lives they had saved, the differences they had made in dark corners of the world. Those memories still hurt, but, for the first time, he allowed himself to remember the good parts too. The pride in a job well done. The satisfaction of protecting innocent people. The unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of shared danger. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe being wounded didn't mean his service was over. Maybe it just meant the next chapter would look different than he had planned. Marcus fell asleep that night with the wooden coin warm in his palm and the first peaceful dreams he had experienced since arriving at Walter Reed. When Emily checked on him during her late rounds, she found him sleeping more peacefully than she had seen since taking over his care. His face, usually tense with pain and anger, looked younger and more relaxed. She made a quiet note in his chart about his improved mood and hoped that tomorrow would bring more progress. Outside, the hospital continued its endless work of healing, one patient at a time, one day at a time, one small act of kindness at a time. For Marcus Rodriguez, the long journey back from the darkness had finally begun. The next morning brought a different Marcus Rodriguez. Emily noticed the change the moment she walked into his room for the early shift. He was sitting up in bed, the wooden coin resting on his palm as he studied it in the morning sunlight streaming through his window. His breakfast tray sat nearby, and, for the first time in weeks, it was nearly empty. "Good morning, Mr. Rodriguez," Emily said, trying to keep the surprise out of her voice. "How did you sleep?" "Better," Marcus replied, meeting her eyes directly. "Thank you for this." He held up the coin, and Emily could see that some of the hardness in his expression had softened overnight. "My brother will be happy to hear you liked it. He worries about soldiers who don't have support systems when they come home." Emily checked his chart on her tablet, noting his improved appetite. "Dr. Patterson wants to see you this morning about the surgery. Are you ready to talk with him?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. About finding new purpose." He paused, rolling the coin between his fingers. "I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm willing to listen." Emily felt a surge of hope. In her short time as a nurse, she had learned that the biggest breakthrough often came when patients moved from resistance to curiosity. Once they started asking questions instead of building walls, real healing could begin. Dr. Patterson arrived an hour later, a kind man in his 50s who had been performing orthopedic surgery on wounded veterans for over a decade. He explained the procedure in detail, how they would need to reposition the pins in Marcus's femur to encourage proper bone growth, how the recovery would involve intensive physical therapy, how the timeline might stretch longer than originally hoped. "The good news," Dr. Patterson said, "is that with proper rehabilitation, you should regain about 80% of your mobility. That's not full recovery, but it's enough to live a normal, active life." "What about military service?" Marcus asked quietly. Dr. Patterson's expression grew gentle but honest. "I'm afraid active duty SEAL operations would be out of the question. The physical demands are just too extreme for a leg that's been this severely damaged. But there are many other ways to serve, Marcus. Many of my former patients have found meaningful careers in training, consulting, or veteran advocacy." Marcus felt the familiar wave of grief wash over him, but this time he didn't let it pull him under. He thought about the coin in his hand, about Emily's brother facing dangers in Afghanistan, about all the ways a person could serve their country and their fellow humans. "When can we do the surgery?" he asked. Dr. Patterson smiled. "I can schedule it for Friday if you're ready. That gives us 3 days to get you as physically prepared as possible." After the doctor left, Emily found Marcus staring out his window at the hospital courtyard below. A physical therapy session was taking place on the outdoor equipment, other wounded veterans working with therapists to rebuild their strength and mobility. Some were missing limbs, others bore the invisible wounds of traumatic brain injury or PTSD. All of them were fighting their own battles against the damage that war had done to their bodies and minds. "It's humbling, isn't it?" Emily said, following his gaze. "Watching people refuse to give up." "I gave up," Marcus said quietly. "For weeks, I just gave up." Emily sat down in the chair beside his bed. "You didn't give up. You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how. Sometimes we have to retreat before we can advance. My brother taught me that, it's basic military strategy. Marcus looked at her with new interest. Your brother talks to you about tactics? He talks to me about everything. We video chat whenever he can get signal. He says I'm his lifeline to the normal world. Emily's voice grew softer. He's been deployed for 8 months this time. It's the longest we've ever been apart. Do you worry about him? Every single day, Emily admitted. But, I've learned that worrying doesn't help either of us. What helps is being ready to support him when he needs it, whether that's listening to his fears or celebrating his victories or just reminding him that someone at home believes in him. Marcus understood. He had been that person for his teammates, and they had been that for him. The unconditional support, the shared understanding, the knowledge that someone had your back no matter what. Losing that network had been almost as devastating as losing his leg. Emily, he said suddenly, what was your brother's call sign? Emily looked puzzled. His what? His call sign. His team designation. Every unit has one, it's how they identify themselves on communications. Oh, Emily said, understanding. I'm not sure I should know that. He's mentioned something called Iron Horse, but I don't know if that's classified or not. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Iron Horse. He knew that designation. It was the call sign for the 4th Infantry Division's combat engineers, the unit that had worked closely with his SEAL team during their final mission. Marcus had called for Iron Horse support over the radio just minutes before the explosion that changed everything. Emily, he said carefully, what's your brother's name? David. David Chen. Why? Do you know him? Marcus stared at her in shock. David Chen. Sergeant Chen from Iron Horse 6. The combat engineer who had personally swept the route that Marcus's team had used to approach their target. The man whose voice he had heard over the radio, calm and professional as he reported the area clear of explosives. Sergeant Chen from Iron Horse 6, Marcus whispered. 5'8", scar on his left hand from a training accident, always carries a picture of his sister in his helmet. Emily's eyes widened. That's him. That's exactly him. How do you? He was there, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. He was part of the operation. His team swept our route, gave us the all-clear. David Chen saved my life, Emily. If his team hadn't found and disabled the IEDs on our approach route, my entire team would have been killed before we ever reached the compound. Emily sat back in her chair, struggling to process this revelation. You knew my brother? You worked with him? Marcus nodded slowly, memories flooding back with startling clarity. We called him Lucky Chen because he had a gift for finding bombs that other teams missed. Your brother is the reason I made it to that compound alive. The explosion that got me was inside the building, a secondary device we couldn't have known about. But, without David's work, none of us would have made it that far. Tears began to form in Emily's eyes. He never told me about working with SEALs. He just said he was supporting special operations. He wouldn't have been allowed to tell you specifics, Marcus explained. But, Emily, your brother is a hero. His work saved lives every single day. And, now. Marcus looked at her with new understanding, now his sister is saving lives too. Different battlefield, same mission. Emily wiped her eyes, overwhelmed by the connection. This can't be a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences anymore, Marcus said. Not after everything I've seen. There's a reason you were assigned to my case, Emily. A reason I'm here and David's there and you're. He paused, searching for the right words. You're the bridge between who I was and who I'm supposed to become. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both processing the magnitude of what they had discovered. Emily thought about all the times David had mentioned the special operators he worked with, the respect and admiration in his voice when he talked about their courage and skill. Marcus thought about the quiet professionalism of the Iron Horse team, how they had risked their lives every day to keep others safe. I want to write to him, Marcus said suddenly. To David. Is there a way to get a message to him? Emily nodded eagerly. I write to him every few days. I could include a letter from you in my next package. I don't know what to say, Marcus admitted. How do you thank someone for saving your life when you never got the chance to save theirs? You tell him the truth, Emily said simply. You tell him that his work mattered. That lives were saved because of his skill and courage. And you tell him that his sister is carrying on the family tradition of service. Marcus spent the rest of the day thinking about what he wanted to say to David Chen. How could he compress the gratitude and respect he felt into words on a page? How could he explain that knowing about Emily's connection to his mission had given him hope for the first time since the explosion? That evening, as Emily prepared to leave her shift, Marcus called her over to his bedside. Emily, he said, I want to do the surgery. I want to try physical therapy. I want to get better. I'm so glad, Emily replied, relief evident in her voice. What changed your mind? Marcus held up the wooden coin, now worn smooth from his constant handling. Your brother carved this for someone who was fighting to come home. I realized that I'm still fighting to come home too. I just didn't understand that home isn't a place, it's a purpose. And maybe my new purpose is to honor the people who saved me by making sure their sacrifice meant something. Emily smiled, understanding flooding her features. David would be proud to hear that. He always says that the best way to thank someone for their service is to make sure it leads to something good. Then, that's what I'm going to do, Marcus said with more conviction than he had felt in months. I'm going to find a way to make it lead to something good. Over the next 3 days, Marcus threw himself into preparing for surgery with the same intensity he had once brought to SEAL training. He worked with physical therapists to strengthen the muscles around his injury. He met with nutritionists to optimize his diet for healing. He spoke with psychologists about managing pain and maintaining motivation during the long recovery ahead. Emily was there through all of it, encouraging him when the exercises hurt, celebrating small victories, reminding him of his goals when discouragement threatened to overwhelm him. She had become more than his nurse, she was his connection to the larger mission of service and sacrifice that had defined his life. The night before his surgery, Emily brought him a package from her brother. Inside was a letter addressed to Marcus, along with a small American flag that David carried on missions. He wanted you to have this, Emily explained as Marcus opened the letter with trembling hands. The letter was brief but powerful. Marcus, Emily told me about your situation and our connection during the Kandahar operation. I'm honored to have served alongside your team, and I'm sorry for the losses you've suffered. The men who didn't make it home were heroes, and their sacrifice saved countless lives. Now it's your turn to be a hero in a different way. Recovery is its own kind of mission, and I know you have the strength to complete it. Take care of my sister, she's the toughest person I know, but she worries about everyone except herself. See you on the other side. David Marcus read the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it beside the wooden coin on his bedside table. Tomorrow would bring surgery, pain, and the beginning of a long journey back to wholeness. But, for the first time since waking up in the hospital, he felt ready for the challenge. As Emily checked on him one final time before her shift ended, Marcus caught her hand gently. Thank you, he said simply. For everything. For caring. For connecting me to your brother. For showing me that service takes many forms. Emily squeezed his hand in return. Thank you for letting me help. And for helping me understand what David goes through every day. We're all stronger when we know we're not alone in the fight. Marcus settled back against his pillows, the flag draped across his chest and the coin warm in his palm. Tomorrow would begin the next phase of his journey, but tonight he felt something he hadn't experienced since Afghanistan. He felt like part of a team again. The surgery lasted 4 hours. Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness as the anesthesia wore off, his mind floating between the sterile reality of the recovery room and fragmented memories of Afghanistan. When he finally opened his eyes fully, Emily was sitting beside his bed, reading a medical journal in the dim evening light. How do you feel? She asked softly, setting down her reading. Like I got hit by a truck, Marcus replied, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube. But, alive. Emily smiled and checked the monitors surrounding his bed. Dr. Patterson says the surgery went perfectly. The bone alignment is much better now, and the new pins should encourage proper healing. You'll be on bed rest for a few days, then we can start gentle physical therapy. Marcus nodded, testing the sensation in his leg. The pain was intense but manageable, nothing compared to those first hours in the Afghan desert. More importantly, he could feel his toes when he concentrated on moving them, a significant improvement from before the surgery. Emily, he said, I've been thinking about what I want to do when I get out of here. Emily pulled her chair closer to his bed, giving him her full attention. Over the past week, she had watched Marcus transform from a broken, angry man into someone who was beginning to glimpse possibilities beyond his injury. His newfound connection to her brother David had sparked something deeper than just improved mood, it had reignited his sense of purpose. I want to work with other wounded veterans, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. Not as a therapist or counselor, I don't have those skills. But, as someone who understands what they're going through. Someone who can help them find their way back to believing in themselves. Emily felt a surge of excitement. That sounds perfect for you. What would that look like? I don't know yet, Marcus admitted. But, I've been thinking about what you said about bridge packages. About helping people remember who they are beyond their injuries. Maybe I could start some kind of program here at the hospital. Pair wounded veterans with others who are further along in their recovery. Create that support system that helped me turn the corner. Over the next several days, as Marcus began his slow recovery from surgery, he and Emily developed his idea further. They researched existing veteran support programs, talked to other patients about their experiences, and consulted with hospital staff about the feasibility of implementing something new. Marcus discovered that while Walter Reed had excellent medical care and traditional therapy programs, there was a gap in peer-to-peer support for the emotional and psychological aspects of recovery. Many veterans, like Marcus himself, struggled not just with physical limitations but with the loss of identity and purpose that came with leaving military service. The thing is, Marcus explained to Dr. Patterson during one of his follow-up appointments, civilians mean well, but they can't really understand what we've lost. They see the injury and think that's the whole problem. But, for most of us, losing our military career is like losing our entire sense of self. Dr. Patterson, who had treated hundreds of wounded veterans, nodded in understanding. What you're describing is exactly what we've been trying to address with our mental health services. But, you're right that peer support could be incredibly valuable. What would you need to get something like this started? Honestly? I'd need to get myself better first, Marcus said. I can't help other people find their way if I'm still lost myself. But, maybe that could be part of the program, showing them that recovery is possible, that there's life and meaning on the other side of this. Emily had been quietly taking notes during the conversation, and now she looked up with excitement. What if we documented your recovery process? Created a resource for other patients to see what the journey looks like from someone who's actually living it? The idea sparked immediate interest from everyone involved. Over the following weeks, as Marcus progressed through his physical therapy, Emily helped him create a detailed journal of his experiences. They wrote about the dark days when motivation seemed impossible to find. They documented the small victories, the first time he could stand without assistance, the day he walked 10 steps with a walker, the moment he realized he was looking forward to something again. Marcus's physical therapy sessions became group events. Other patients began stopping by to watch his exercises, to ask questions about his experiences, to share their own struggles and victories. Without any formal structure, a support network began forming around Marcus's hospital room. You know what's interesting, said Jennifer Walsh, an Army sergeant who had lost her left arm to an IED blast. When the doctors talk to us about recovery, it all sounds clinical and distant. But, when Marcus talks about it, it feels real. Like something that's actually possible. Marcus found that helping others was accelerating his own recovery. Each conversation with a fellow veteran reminded him of the strength they all possessed, the resilience that had made them effective military personnel in the first place. He began to see that his injury hadn't taken away his ability to lead and inspire, it had simply changed the context in which he could use those skills. Emily watched this transformation with growing admiration. Her brother David had always talked about the importance of mission focus in military units, how having a clear purpose could drive soldiers to achieve seemingly impossible goals. She could see that same dynamic at work in Marcus now that he had found a new mission. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after Marcus's surgery. He had progressed to using crutches and could walk short distances independently. The hospital was preparing for his discharge, and Marcus was both excited and nervous about returning to civilian life. Emily was helping him organize his belongings when they heard a commotion in the hallway outside his room. Raised voices, someone crying, and the sound of medical equipment being moved quickly. Emily stepped into the hallway and returned moments later with a concerned expression. "There's a new patient coming in," she said quietly. "Marine, lost both legs to a roadside bomb in Syria. He's been refusing all treatment for 3 days, won't talk to anyone. The medical team is running out of options." Marcus felt the familiar surge of purpose that had once driven him into dangerous missions. This wasn't Afghanistan, but it was a battlefield nonetheless, the battlefield of recovery and hope. And there was a fellow warrior who needed support. "What's his name?" Marcus asked, reaching for his crutches. "Corporal Jamie Martinez. 22 years old, deployed twice. No family in the area." Emily paused, understanding what Marcus was thinking. "Marcus, you're not officially part of any program here. The hospital might not allow you to visit other patients." "Then, let's not ask permission," Marcus replied. "Let's ask forgiveness afterward if we need to." Emily hesitated for only a moment before nodding. She had learned to trust Marcus's instincts about what wounded veterans needed. Together, they made their way slowly down the hallway toward the room where Jamie Martinez was beginning his own dark journey through injury and loss. The scene in Martinez's room was heartbreakingly familiar. The young Marine lay turned away from the door, his face toward the wall, his chart showing that he had refused food, medication, and all attempts at communication. 2 nurses and a psychiatrist stood nearby, discussing options in hushed tones. Marcus approached the bed slowly, his crutches tapping softly on the floor. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the authority of someone who had been exactly where Jamie was now. "Corporal Martinez," Marcus said. "I'm Marcus Rodriguez, former Navy SEAL. I was blown up in Afghanistan 2 months ago. Shattered my right leg, lost most of my team. I know you don't want to talk to anyone right now, but I'm not here as a therapist or a doctor. I'm here as someone who understands what you're going through." Jamie didn't respond, but Marcus noticed that his breathing changed slightly, the first sign that he was listening. "I spent 3 weeks refusing treatment," Marcus continued, settling into a chair beside the bed. "Wouldn't eat, wouldn't talk, wouldn't cooperate with anything. I was convinced that my life was over, that there was no point in trying to recover. I was wrong, but I had to figure that out for myself." Still no response from Jamie, but the medical staff had stopped talking and was watching this interaction with interest. "Here's what I wish someone had told me when I was where you are now," Marcus said. "You're not just a Marine who got injured. You're a Marine who survived something that should have killed you. That takes the same kind of strength that got you through boot camp, through deployment, through everything that made you into the warrior you are. That strength doesn't disappear because you got hurt. It just has to be focused on a different kind of mission." For several minutes, Marcus sat quietly beside Jamie's bed, not pushing for conversation but making his presence felt. Emily stood nearby, ready to provide support if needed but understanding that this moment belonged to the 2 veterans. Finally, Jamie turned his head slightly, just enough to see Marcus with one eye. "How many guys did you lose?" Jamie asked quietly. 4, Marcus replied without hesitation. 4 of the best men I ever knew. Jamie turned a little further, revealing a young face marked by pain and exhaustion. "I lost my whole squad. 8 Marines. I was supposed to be point man, but I switched positions with Rodriguez at the last minute. Rodriguez stepped on the IED instead of me. Marcus felt the familiar weight of survivor's guilt, a burden he knew would never fully disappear.
What was Rodriguez's first name?
Carlos. Carlos Rodriguez. He had a baby daughter back home, showed us her picture every day. Jamie's voice broke slightly.
I should have been the one to step on that bum.
No, Marcus said firmly.
You survived for a reason, Jamie. Maybe the reason is sitting in this room right now. Maybe it's something you haven't discovered yet.
But there is a reason, and figuring out what it is, that's your mission now.
Over the next hour, Marcus shared his story with Jamie.
He talked about the darkness he had felt, the anger and despair that had consumed him. But he also talked about Emily, about the connection to her brother David, about the way purpose had slowly returned to his life when he began focusing on helping others.
I'm not saying it's easy, Marcus concluded. Recovery is the hardest mission you'll ever undertake. Harder than anything the Corps ever asked of you.
But you have the training for it, even if it doesn't feel like it right now.
And you don't have to do it alone.
When Marcus finally left Jamie's room, the young Marine had agreed to try eating something small and to meet with the prosthetics specialist the next day. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a beginning. Emily found Marcus sitting in his own room afterward, staring out the window with tears in his eyes. "You did something amazing today," she said softly.
"I saw myself in him," Marcus replied.
"The anger, the hopelessness, the guilt. If I can help him avoid some of the time I wasted feeling sorry for myself, then maybe this whole thing starts to make sense." Emily sat down beside him, understanding that they had just witnessed the birth of something important. Marcus had found his calling, his new way of serving. The specifics would need to be worked out, hospital policies, formal training, administrative approval, but the core purpose was clear.
"What do you want to call it?" she asked. "Your program?"
Marcus thought for a moment, remembering the wooden coin that had started his own journey back to hope.
"Bridge Company," he said.
"We build bridges between the battlefield and home. Between who they were and who they can become."
Emily smiled. "Bridge Company. I like that. And I know someone who would like it too."
That night, Emily wrote her longest letter ever to her brother David. She told him about Marcus's transformation, about the connection that had sparked his recovery, about the program he was planning to help other wounded veterans. She told him how proud she was to be his sister and how much his service meant to people he would never meet. Marcus spent the evening writing in his journal, documenting not just his physical progress but his emotional journey back to purpose and hope. Tomorrow he would begin the process of turning Bridge Company from an idea into a reality. There would be paperwork and meetings, training and certifications, policies and procedures. But tonight, as he held David's wooden coin and thought about Jamie Martinez trying to find the courage to face another day, Marcus knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The mission had changed, but the mission continued. And, for the first time since Afghanistan, that felt like enough. 6 months later, Marcus Rodriguez stood before a room full of medical professionals, veteran advocates, and hospital administrators at Walter Reed Medical Center. His right leg still required a specialized brace, and he walked with a slight limp that would never fully disappear. But his voice was strong and clear as he addressed the audience gathered for the official launch of the Bridge Company program. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, "I want to tell you about a conversation I had yesterday with a young soldier named Sarah Chen."
Emily looked up sharply from her seat in the front row.
Chen was her family name, but she had never mentioned a Sarah. "Sarah lost her left arm and suffered traumatic brain injury in a convoy attack in Iraq," Marcus continued. "She's been at Walter Reed for 4 months, making excellent physical progress but struggling with the psychological aspects of her recovery. Yesterday, she told me something that reminded me why we're all here today." Marcus paused, looking out at the faces of people who had dedicated their careers to helping wounded veterans. Sarah said, "Mr. Rodriguez, I know I'm supposed to be grateful to be alive.
Everyone keeps telling me how lucky I am. But I don't feel lucky. I feel lost. I feel like the person I used to be died in that explosion, and I don't know who I'm supposed to be now."
The room was completely silent, everyone recognizing the truth in those words.
Sarah's struggle is why Bridge Company exists, Marcus said.
Not to replace the excellent medical care and traditional therapy that Walter Reed provides, but to address the gap between healing the body and healing the spirit. To help our wounded warriors understand that losing the ability to do their old job doesn't mean losing their value as human beings. Over the past 6 months, Marcus had worked tirelessly to develop Bridge Company from a simple idea into a comprehensive peer support program. With Emily's help and the backing of progressive hospital administrators, he had created a system that paired newly injured veterans with those who were further along in their recovery journey. The program had 3 main components: one-on-one mentorship, group support sessions, and practical skills training. Veterans who had successfully navigated their own recovery process were trained to provide emotional support, share coping strategies, and help newcomers envision possibilities for their future lives. The numbers speak for themselves, Dr. Patterson told the audience as he presented the program's early statistics. Veterans who participate in Bridge Company show significantly faster progress in physical therapy, better compliance with medical treatment, and improved scores on psychological wellness assessments. But, more importantly, they report higher levels of hope and purpose.
Emily had been instrumental in documenting the program's effectiveness.
Her nursing background gave her the clinical knowledge to track patient outcomes, while her personal connection to military service through her brother David provided insight into the unique needs of wounded veterans. After the presentation, Emily found Marcus in the hallway outside the conference room, surrounded by people eager to learn more about Bridge Company or to implement similar programs at other medical facilities.
Sarah Chen, Emily said quietly when the crowd had dispersed. Is she related to David? Marcus smiled.
His cousin. She was injured 3 weeks ago and transferred here from Landstuhl. I was hoping to surprise you when you met her, but I couldn't resist mentioning her in the speech. Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. The connections kept multiplying, first Marcus and David, then David and her, now Sarah and their entire extended family of service and sacrifice.
How is she doing? Better every day.
She reminds me a lot of someone else I know, tough, determined, refuses to give up even when things seem impossible.
Marcus looked at Emily with deep affection. She wants to meet you.
Turns out David talks about his sister a lot in his letters to the family. As they walked towards Sarah's room, Emily reflected on how much had changed since that first day when she had been assigned to care for a broken, angry SEAL who refused all help. Marcus had not only recovered from his physical injuries but had discovered a new calling that gave his life deeper meaning than ever before. Bridge Company now served dozens of patients, with a waiting list of veterans eager to become mentors once their own recoveries progressed sufficiently. The program had attracted attention from other military medical facilities, and Marcus found himself traveling to conferences and training sessions to share his model with healthcare providers across the country. Emily, Marcus said as they paused outside Sarah's room, I need to tell you something. Emily turned to face him, noting the serious tone in his voice. I got a call from the Pentagon yesterday, Marcus continued. They want Bridge Company to become a permanent part of the military medical system.
Full funding, official recognition, expansion to every major treatment facility that serves wounded veterans. Emily's face lit up with excitement.
Marcus, that's incredible. That means you'll be able to help thousands of people instead of just dozens. It is incredible, Marcus agreed. But it also means I'll need to step back from direct patient care and focus on program administration, training, and development. I'll need someone to take over the day-to-day operations here at Walter Reed. Someone who understands both the medical side and the personal side of what we're doing. Emily felt her heart skip a beat as she realized what he was asking. I want you to be the program coordinator, Marcus said. I know it would mean leaving traditional nursing, but, Emily, you're the reason Bridge Company exists. Your brother's coin, your understanding of military families, your ability to connect with people, it all started with you. Emily leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering.
I don't have training in psychology or social work.
Neither did I when I started this, Marcus replied. But you have something more important, you have heart.
And you understand that healing isn't just about medical procedures. It's about helping people find their way back to themselves.
Before Emily could respond, the door to Sarah's room opened and a young woman emerged. She was about Emily's age, with short black hair and her left arm in a sling. Despite obvious fatigue and the telltale signs of recent trauma, her eyes held the same determination that Emily had come to recognize in her brother and in Marcus.
"You must be Emily," Sarah said with a slight smile. "David has told me so much about you. He says you're the toughest person in your family." Emily laughed, immediately liking this cousin she had never met. "He clearly hasn't told you about our grandmother.
She survived the Cultural Revolution and still makes dumplings that could feed an army." As the three of them talked, Emily felt the familiar sense of connection that had marked every important moment in this journey. Sarah's story was different from Marcus's. She had been injured while providing medical aid to Afghan civilians, using her training as a combat medic to save lives under fire. But her struggle to find meaning beyond her injury was heartbreakingly familiar. "The hardest part," Sarah explained, "isn't the physical stuff. I'm learning to do everything one-handed. It's the feeling that I'm not contributing anymore. In Afghanistan, I knew exactly what my purpose was: save lives, protect my unit, serve my country. Here, I feel useless." Marcus nodded in understanding. "That feeling is exactly why Bridge Company exists. Your value as a person isn't tied to your ability to perform specific physical tasks. It's tied to who you are at your core: a healer, a protector, someone who puts others before herself." "But what can I do with one arm?" Sarah asked. Emily leaned forward, her voice filled with conviction. "You can do exactly what Marcus is doing. You can help other wounded veterans understand that their lives still have meaning. You can share your story, your strength, your refusal to give up. You can be living proof that recovery is possible." Over the next hour, Emily watched Marcus work with Sarah, using all the skills he had developed as a peer counselor. He didn't minimize her losses or offer false optimism. Instead, he helped her identify the qualities that had made her an effective medic: compassion, quick thinking under pressure, the ability to stay calm in crisis, and showed her how those same qualities could be valuable in civilian life. As they prepared to leave Sarah's room, Emily made her decision. "Marcus," she said, "I'll do it. I'll take over Bridge Company operations here." Marcus's face broke into a wide grin. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Emily replied. "This work is too important to leave to someone who doesn't understand what military families go through. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't get too carried away with your Pentagon meetings and forget about the individual patients who need help." That evening, Emily called her brother David to tell him about her career change. To her surprise, he already knew about Bridge Company and Marcus's work. "Marcus wrote to me last month," David explained over their video call. "He told me about the program and how you've been involved from the beginning. Emily, I'm so proud of you. You found a way to serve too, just like we always talked about." Emily felt tears in her eyes as she looked at her brother's face on the screen. He looked tired but healthy, and she could see the pride in his expression as he talked about her decision. "David," she said, "there's something else. Marcus mentioned a classified call sign during one of our first conversations. Iron Horse. He said you saved his life." David's expression grew serious. "I can't talk about specific operations, but I can tell you that working with Marcus's team was an honor. Those SEALs saved a lot of lives that day, even though it cost them everything." "Marcus wants to create a memorial for his teammates," Emily said. "Part of the Bridge Company program. He thinks it will help veterans understand that honoring the dead means living meaningful lives ourselves." David nodded slowly. "Tell him I'll help with that however I can." "And, Emily?" "Tell him that his recovery, his work with other veterans, that's exactly the kind of thing that makes our sacrifices worthwhile. Knowing that something good came out of all the pain and loss." 3 months later, Bridge Company held its first annual memorial ceremony. Veterans from across the region gathered to honor fallen comrades and to celebrate the ongoing mission of healing and service. Marcus spoke about his 4 teammates, sharing memories of their courage and character.
Other veterans shared their own stories of loss and recovery.
Emily watched from the audience as Marcus unveiled a memorial wall featuring photos and stories of fallen service members whose surviving teammates were part of the Bridge Company program. At the center was a larger display featuring Marcus's SEAL team, with their call sign prominently displayed, Trident 7.
As the ceremony concluded, Emily noticed a familiar figure in the crowd.
Sarah Chen, now wearing a prosthetic arm and the Bridge Company volunteer badge, was deep in conversation with a newly arrived veteran who looked lost and overwhelmed.
"Sergeant Williams," Sarah was saying to the young man, "I know this feels impossible right now. But I want to tell you about a program that changed my life. It's called Bridge Company, and it's run by some of the strongest people you'll ever meet."
Emily smiled, remembering her first day caring for Marcus, when he refused to speak or engage with anyone trying to help him. Now he was running a program that was transforming lives across the military medical system. Sarah, who had arrived feeling useless and broken, was becoming a skilled peer counselor herself. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus found Emily standing before the memorial wall, reading the stories of the fallen heroes whose legacies lived on through the healing work of Bridge Company. "Regrets?" he asked softly.
Emily shook her head. "None. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even when it means dealing with my Pentagon meetings and conference calls?" Emily laughed. "Especially then. Someone has to keep you grounded in the real mission, helping individual veterans find their way back to hope." As they walked together toward the hospital, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A wounded SEAL who had lost everything, a rookie nurse trying to find her place in the world, a combat engineer serving overseas who would never know how his carved wooden coin had started a chain reaction of healing and hope. The connections that had seemed like coincidences now felt like destiny. Every veteran they helped went on to help others. Every life saved multiplied into more lives touched, more families healed, more futures reclaimed from the darkness of trauma and loss. Bridge Company had grown beyond anything Emily could have imagined that first day when she placed David's carved coin on Marcus's bedside table. But, at its heart, it remained exactly what it had always been, a reminder that service takes many forms, that healing is possible, and that no one has to face their battles alone. As Emily looked back at the memorial wall one more time, she thought about all the veterans who would benefit from Bridge Company in the years to come. Wounded warriors who would arrive broken and angry, just as Marcus had. Peer counselors who would discover new purpose in helping others, just as Sarah had. Families who would find hope in the darkness, just as she had found meaning in her brother's service. The mission continued, one veteran at a time, one connection at a time, one act of service at a time. And Emily Chan, sister of Iron Horse 6, coordinator of Bridge Company, knew that she was exactly where she belonged.